Tom, did did he pass on the Arkansas job was because Fayetteville was too nice? You're a resident there, man.
Hey, guys. Good morning. And it's a lovely day. I don't know. Mike Leach was asked about it yesterday by Bob on the SEC call. He's like, anything we talked about is, between us, between the parties. I don't know. It could have been that $5 million was his asking price, and maybe the Razorbacks weren't prepared to do $5 million, or maybe they didn't get a good vibe off of Leach, because Sam Pittman sold himself, and his passion for Razorback football and wanting to be here. And I get the feeling that Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach might have wanted to be, wooed, like, we're the big names, and what can you do for me to get me there? And Sam Pittman sold himself. Now, I don't know if that's the way everything went down, but those guys had a little bit more leverage than Sam Pittman did. So that's where we wind up where we are today.
Tom, our Morning Rush poll question is, what should be the expectation for Arkansas on Saturday night against Mississippi State? So I'll ask that to you. What should be the expectation for that football game?
Well, in a broad sense, to me, be competitive. Like the Georgia game, they were competitive until the third quarter with the block punt and the pick six. Just be competitive. Be on the field. Make Mississippi State feel like they've been in a physical game. But there's a lot of components that are going to come with that. I mean, they cannot let Kylan Hill just run all over them like he did last year. And I think they'll be a better tackling team. I think the defense will play better. It's just that they're so high-powered. And I'm going to go into a little bit of a deal here, but Sam Pittman described the way they run their offense as they get set, and then they see what the defense is doing. So maybe they'll run some motion to see if the corner or the nickelback goes with a guy in motion to determine whether you're in man or zone. And if they do, and then when they do that, then they look over to Mike Leach, and he makes another call. So they check from one pass play to another pass play, and so they've always got a chance to try to get man coverage, and then they run rub routes across the middle and try to get one DB screened off from a receiver who's crossing over the middle, and then that guy's running wide open. Happened to LSU time after time, and LSU used its linebackers to try to create extra pressure, and it left the middle of the field open. So it's a dilemma. If Arkansas's linebackers drop into the middle areas of the field to try to cut down on the crossing routes, then you're probably only rushing with four guys. And so I think guys like Julius Coates and Mateo Soli and Zach Williams are going to be super huge in this game to get KJ Costello off his point.
Do you see any games this year, and particularly this one, where Arkansas can go in and play man coverage, particularly press at the line of scrimmage? I don't know how many games this year Arkansas, with this schedule, is going to be able to press up at the line of scrimmage and go man-to-man very often.
Right, yeah, and I don't think that's going to be a regular event, but you got to do it some. And what Barry Odom's got to do is try to fool KJ Costello and try to show one thing and do another thing. And I mean, you can't get away with that all the time. And Mike Leach is cagey. He's been through this, so it's going to be a really good chess match between he and Barry Odom. And obviously, them being at home, them kind of soaring on the success from last week, things are kind of in their favor. So Arkansas is going to have to. I mean, LSU got a couple turnovers. Arkansas needs to get a couple turnovers and win the turnover battle, as they did not do last week, to be competitive. But that's my expectation, is to be in the game. It was a blowout at halftime of the Mississippi State game last year.
Yeah, and the last couple of years, it has not been pretty in this series. Tom Murphy with us here on the Morning Rush. Now, after thoroughly reading the rule book, they're still going to determine the winner Saturday night based on the number of points scored. And in order for Arkansas to improve there, Tom, your offensive drives have to be more productive. Arkansas had 12 drives out of their 16 that had 4 plays or less. That is an area that we can talk about the defense improving and how you're going to stop Costello. None of that really matters unless you get your offense more effectively down the field consistently. How does Arkansas fix their offense this week?
Right.
Other than not playing Georgia.
I do think that they're not going to see a defense, or maybe when Alabama rolls around here at the end of the year, right, they won't see a defense quite as fast and just it's seeming like knowledgeable, like schemed up in every way. And the little middle screen they threw to Rakeem Boyd, Monty Rice was all over. I do think that it was a good lesson for them, and they're going to line up better to give Felipe Franks more time to see things and possibly check things at the line, and also establish the running game. A good way to beat Mississippi State is if you can establish the run, knock them off the ball a little bit, and then end your drives with touchdowns. And there's a little bit of pressure on the air raid to try to score, because it can be a track meet. LSU got into the track meet, and they didn't succeed. They only ran for 80-something yards, averaged 2.1 yards per carry. So obviously there's something pretty good going on with the Mississippi State defensive front to choke down the run game the way they did. But Arkansas has got to get Rakeem Boyd on the loose some in this game.
Talking with Tom Murphy here on the Morning Rush. Tom, what I brought up this morning, this is the first stop on the comparison tour between Sam Pittman, between Mike Leach. Now, the game on Saturday night, whoever wins or loses, it's not going to determine the success that these guys will both have at their tenures, but this is the first head-to-head matchup that we get to see between a guy that might have been your head coach. Do you think that's added pressure on Sam Pittman in this football game?
Yeah, I really don't think Sam Pittman views it in that manner. Mike Leach took over a different type of roster and brought in a super veteran quarterback like Arkansas did, and a pretty talented defense. There's still some guys like Earl Thompson, some of the DBs they have that are veteran guys who are good players. And Sam Pittman took over a different roster. Now, I think the first half of the Georgia game showed that they could start believing in what the coaching staff is doing, like what Barry Odom is running and what he's calling, how he's trying to disguise things on defense. The guys can buy into that. And you heard Grant Morgan on Sam Pittman's radio show last night talk about how they believe now. I mean, they think they can be a competitive team. And so I don't know if, game one between Pittman and Leach does anything other than determine which team, what their records are this year. But I like the direction Sam Pittman's going in. He said they feel really good about their game plan going into this game. So we'll see what happens.
I know that a lot was made out of the Mississippi State win against LSU on Saturday. And I look at this LSU roster from top to bottom based on what they lost from last year, based on no Derek Stingley Jr. and stuff. And I just think the win might be, when we look back at it, a little overrated. And I also think the SEC West is wide open in terms of second place. Tom, when you look at the SEC West right now, I mean, is there really a team that solidified itself as the clear and concise second best team in the SEC West?
Well, Auburn and Texas A&M didn't have super impressive wins. I mean, Auburn's defense played very well. Texas A&M, I didn't see as much of that game, but just the final score, they were at home, 17-12 against Vanderbilt, not a super impressive result. Also, Alabama still had a lot of their starting back seven in the game when Missouri scored some points in the second half of that game and held Alabama to under 100 total yards in the second half. So it's a different year. I mean, we've talked about this, leading up into the season. There was going to be some strange things, some COVID-related things, guys missing, areas of the game that you didn't get to rep as much, maybe. So I do think the SEC West has got some openness to it, and Mississippi State clearly probably sees themselves as a team that can jump up in there. LSU's roster was depleted massively, and I don't think you can really underestimate the loss of Joe Brady and Dave Aranda and all those offensive skill guys. And so not that anybody might have called Mississippi State's win at LSU, but to think that they could have gone in there and been very competitive, yes, I think you could have called that.
Yeah. Arkansas clearly had some special teams issues last week, particularly in the coverage game. Having some of these players back that were absent a week ago, that's bound to help. What else has to change, Tom, this week for special teams to look more special?
Yeah, they've got to get off their block. I mean, Sam Pittman talked about it. They've changed some of their personnel on special teams. They want to be a little heavier. But I think on the free kick, I'm not sure which kick Sam Pittman was talking about, but on one of them, he said when the return man caught the ball, there wasn't a Razorback within 40 yards. So the dude had a total head of steam, and it was one of the 40-plus yard returns that they had. Mm-hmm. Getting off blocks better, just being more physical. And he said, you're going to get grabbed, on the way down. They just got to fight off that better. And Arkansas was not a bad cover team, not a horrible cover team last year, but they were on Saturday. I like what they got from the punters. I think A.J. Reed's going to be okay at kicker. And they've got to get a few more touchbacks out of Vito Calvaruso because Georgia showed if it's not a touchback, they had a chance to break them. Yeah. And so, and then they have to get the punt shield issue fixed that led to the block punt too.
Earplugs or no earplugs for you on Saturday?
I am glad you asked me the question. I have already been packing and didn't have them in there, and I will walk in there and put them in. I do not like cowbells. It's illegal, and I wish the SEC would really enforce that. Well, I'll be bringing my earbuds in.
I think Clay summed it up perfectly. When Alabama loses a couple of games there, and Alabama and Nick Saban start having an issue with the cowbells, that's when they will disappear. And only until then will that. It's fine until Alabama's mad about it.
It almost just strikes me is when they let them have them. It was almost like, well, poor little Mississippi State. They're not very good in football. We'll let them do this. Mm-hmm. And now they're a very good, strong team, and it's against the rules. It's an artificial noisemaker, and they shouldn't have them.
Yeah, when Saban gets mad about it, they'll disappear. So, all right, well, safe travels to Starkville, and we'll talk next week.
Sounds good, guys. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Tom.